You can take refined white wheat flour, which has literally no nutrition in it, that has really very little nutrients, minerals and vitamins, and make a loaf out of it. It might become very airy with a beautiful crust and with a lot of bubbles inside, but frankly speaking, it will be just a flavor and a sensation that you will get when eating it, but it will give zero to your health, and in fact it might even be harmful. So what we want to do is actually to make a bread that nurtures us, the bread that keeps us healthy, that gives our body vitamins and minerals, that gives us necessary nutrients, that keeps us full and doesn't create any side effects in our digestion system. Yes, it's really, really important. I didn't start learning to do sourdough just for fun, to be honest. My main motivation was to make the bread that I can eat without the heavy feeling in my stomach, without allergic reactions, which I actually got to a lot of store-bought breads before. So I really studied really deep of what bread will be best for my body. And here the choice of the flour is crucial. So first of all, the flour is categorized, of course, by the type of the grain it's made of. So the most common flour worldwide, you can find it in any country, is of course wheat and different types of wheat. Yes, there are like plenty types of wheat, and usually wheat is the flour that's used for classical pastry and for French style baking, for country loaves, for those classical breads that you often see in the pictures, because this flour is rich in gluten, so it creates really nice connections and the bread rises very nicely, and it also has a certain taste profile that a lot of people enjoy. I'm talking now about the common types of wheat available in the market. There are also so-called heritage wheat varieties, and here we're talking about things like kamut or einkorn. Sometimes durum is also considered to be part of those hard type of wheats, that are heritage wheats, and they're actually better. Like if you look at the health aspect of it, they have all the qualities of the normal wheat, but they have a lot more nutrition in them, and they're normally better accepted also by our digestion system. Another type of common flours is rye. Rye bread has very little gluten, so it's very difficult to shape it into the loaf. So it's a perfect choice of flour for breads which are baked in forms, and it's also one of the healthiest options. The other grain that I would like to draw your attention to is spelt. So spelt is also kind of a wheat, but it has significantly less gluten and also very different nutrition profile. It's really rich in vitamins and also is generally considered to be a healthier option to wheat. And one category of flours that I will not gonna go into any detail is gluten-free flours, of course. I just want to tell you that if it's an issue, if you really want to cut gluten, and I know that a lot of people, a lot of students who study courses with that, they do want to minimize gluten in their diet. Yes, it's possible to create a sourdough which is gluten-free. In our family, luckily, nobody really has big problems with gluten, and our rye bread never gave us any problems or complications. So we are sticking to it, and by the experience of our family, we can vouch for it as a very healthy choice. So generally speaking, we can always say there are normal flours and there are whole grain flours, but it's not as easy as that, because like normal fine flours and the whole grain flours, they also have different categorizations within, and they also have different names and numbers. I know that we have a global audience on Happy Bellyfish, so I will not be using like concrete names and definitely not concrete brands talking about the flour and the type of the milling, but there are general categories. So we will mostly use whole grain flours, and generally I always recommend that when you do go into bread baking, and if you want to do it on a regular basis, like to make it a daily part of your diet, not a special treat, go for more nutrition-rich flours. Now let me explain what's the difference. The super fine flours and white flours, they are often called all-purpose flour, self-rising flour, cake flour. I'm right now in Germany. These are the flours which have numbers like 450. These are the flours that are really not just very finely milled, but they also have a huge part of the grain removed. So actually the parts of the grain that contain a lot of nutrition are not there anymore. What you have is a lot of carbs inside, and they practically give very little to our bodies. So it also, by the way, the fact that there is so little nutrition affects the ability of your bread to rise and get the shape, because the starter is like a living organism, so it needs food, it needs nutrition, and the more nutrition it has, the faster and stronger it grows. And if you take the flour that has no nutrition, then there will be very little chance for success. So we will not be using this type of flours, and I really recommend you not to use them ever. Actually, even if you make cakes and more delicate pastries, you also can go for more dense and whole grain flours. Okay, now let's move to the whole grain category. Very often when we think of a whole grain bread or whole grain flour, we think of something with really big chunks of grain. Well, it's not necessary like that, because the grain can be milled in a different way. But if it's not refined, it might still get a lot of parts of the super nutritious grain inside, even if it looks very fine. The categories of the whole grain flours will really depend their names on the country that you're based in. Again, in Germany, it's always indicated by the numbers. So the range somewhere from 630 to 1150. The 1150, to put it in very simple terms, has more parts of the grain inside, more fiber, more parts of bran, and it's also not milled as fine. So let me just show you the pictures. I'll demonstrate you, like, let's see here. Here you can see 3 different types of wheat flour. I'm not showing you the cake or all-purpose flour because it's just never in our studio, it's never in our cooking school, so I don't even have it to show. Here we have the finely milled, but very strong, it's called very often strong wheat flour. You see, it's very white. I mean, it's actually off-white. I'm not sure if it's clear in the camera, but yes, it's very fine and it's rather whitish. Then in the middle, we have a flour that in Germany has the number 1150. And this is kind of the roughest of the finest. So it still has all the parts of the grain, but it's pretty much finely milled. But yet you can see that it has a much darker color, and also if you see close up, you can see tiny parts of the grain bran. And here's a whole wheat flour, and you can see literally the chunks of the grain. And this is the type of the flour, by the way, that we will be using for the starter. A very important aspect is also, if you can get the organic flour, get it. There were multiple studies done that were confirming that the type of soil and the type of fertilizers or non-fertilizers, chemicals, non-chemicals were used on the grain growth affect significantly what was inside the grain when it grew. And I'm not talking here about possible toxicity of certain fertilizers, but also about the nutrition part of it. So as I said, you want to eat something that's the most nurturing for you. So if you can, please go for organic. If you have the possibility, try to find a local or regional mill. Try to find a small artisan producer maybe of the flour who mills the grain fresh, who really watch the standards and also put salt in the flour that they produce. Usually the smaller flour producers have the much higher quality product. It's also much fresher, and it really gives you a much better experience and a much better rate for success with your bread.